Change. The Astrotherapy Podcast. Interviews. So, welcome to the Astrotherapy Podcast, where we are exploring the theme of change. This is a particular series that is all about the exploration of moment-to-moment shifting and the ability, the capacity to meet those changes. And today I'm really, really honored to share with you a dear friend, Ryan Maguire. And Ryan, you are a gem of a human. You are a true gift that came into my life. You have prepared me for the biggest quest of my life thus far. And it's hard for me to imagine that there will be a bigger quest, although I think the rest of my life is probably part of that. I've trusted my breath and my body and my future into your hands with a real willingness and a readiness to step into the unknown with you, just knowing in full faith that I would be better than I was before. And that has definitely been the case. You are a primitive wilderness expert, ancestral wilderness expert, perhaps. You are an advocate for helping people such as myself and all walks of life to go into nature and find a part of themselves that they perhaps have forgotten. So I deeply thank you, Ryan, for being here and also for being in the studio, for traversing some technical difficulties with me when I know that your heart really belongs out there in the wild. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. That was a beautiful, very kind intro. Our adventure together definitely stands out as one that I'll never forget, and particularly your willingness to say "fafo," just fuck around and find out, and just see what happens. The way that you trusted some man in a beat up truck to pick you up at the airport and drive you literally into the middle of nowhere in the middle of winter, saying you're going to learn how to survive. And you did just that. And it's really cool to see. I think oftentimes folks talk about, when they refer to me as a wilderness guide, they're like, yeah, you go to help people remember how to reconnect and experience that deep remembering. But selfishly, they're all trips also for myself, because just like anyone else, I get pulled in different directions. But I always feel most authentically like myself when I'm living in a wild and feral state. And I think that's true for just about anybody that I've interacted with thus far. So
Awesome, Ryan. I love your feral state. I love that you radiate that, and as a reflection and a reminder that we all have that capacity in us to return to a feral way of being that is not confined by, society's infrastructure and, the shoulds and the burdens of what we've created for ourselves that take us away from our true nature. Ryan, when I say the word change, what comes up for you?
today it's that my truck broke down. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. I've had an old beat up truck for a long time that we we've been living out of for the last couple weeks, just doing big mountain adventures. And so it becomes like this really cool tool that you get very close with. And now, yeah, she's in a bad spot. So now it's about, where do I go from here? And I guess it is a willingness to not hold on to the past. That's kind of what I think about, whether it's understanding that you have to get a new machine to take you from place to place, or move on from an old partner, or move, physical locations.
How do you feel that nature mirrors change back to us?
That's a good question. Well, in nature, there is much more rapid and consequential change. We're, as like modern day humans, we're trying to engineer change kind of out of our lives in favor of predictability, right? It's like Our houses, they don't change temperature. They're always 70 degrees. They're always temperature controlled. They're always stable. Versus the wilderness, you may have rain, hail, snow, hot weather all in one day. And there's also a changing of the environment constantly. There's an old saying, man never crosses a river twice because the river has changed and so is the man. And so basically, the more time you spend in nature, you find how true that is. Like, there's never a place that I cross that the river looks exactly the same as I left it. There may be different plants there now, or an animal has trodden through there, or a tree has fallen, or things like that. And so it's a constantly dynamic state, which is pretty much the antithesis of the way we live in our houses and our boxes and our cars, which are aimed to be constantly stagnant.
Do you feel that your relationship with nature has been reflective of the changes that you've gone through in your own life? Like, is it a place that you go to when you're traversing change? I'm wondering if you can recall some major shifts in your life of which you went to nature for understanding.
For me at this point, it's a relatively dependent situation where I can't really be out of it for too long. There's kind of two things. It's like being in nature slash physical movement. Like if I don't have those two things, I become like a relatively subpar human being. Like I become unmotivated. My brain is slow. I'm not as kind to people. I don't have drive or ambition. Um, I'm just kind of a shell of myself. And so I know for me, that's kind of my medicine is being in remote wilderness and moving my body. And I think that's probably true for a lot of human beings, whether they realize it or not. There's a well understood seasonality to depression, right? That has to do with the changing of the seasons. And, usually people in October, November, December start to kind of struggle. I'm sure there's some astrotherapy stuff with that too. But I know for myself, there was always kind of a predictable downturn during those times as I was a younger kid. And I don't think I was able to put my finger on it, but now it makes a lot of sense. It's less outdoor nature time, less activity, and that ends up being a precursor for mental health struggles, I think for me and I think for most human beings.
What happens to you when you go out there? Like, what's the experience that you have?
Gratitude is one of the biggest. Um, a lot of times I'm in the front country, I have like gratitude practices, but I find it like cumbersome or like it takes a lot of tuning to be super grateful about life. Versus when I'm in the wilderness, I'm able to like tap into a gracious, like grateful state within seconds. And like it's a more fulfilling gratitude. It's like not a uh, post on your Instagram story about what you're grateful type of gratitude. It's a gratitude that's like deep and resonating and is effortless. You're instantly grateful for everything you have without having to try. You don't need a gratitude practice because it just comes up naturally. I'm much more grateful for like my loved ones and all the things that I have in my life. Some of that can come from beautiful days in the wilderness that are like, just, gosh, life's amazing. This is the most beautiful place I've ever been. It can also come in the form of really hard days in the wilderness. Like, wow, I have a really good life. Today was really challenging, and I'm really thankful for everything I have. I guess there's a third prong to that, which is I spend a lot of time alone. I personally believe that one of the things that we're missing in the West is, what I would call like a vision quest or um, a solo fast, which is basically, obviously, you're familiar with this being a student, but I am a big believer that you can tap into different RPMs if you sit by yourself in the wilderness. And it's a practice that I try to do several times per year. And that's kind of that third prong of gratitude, which is when you're alone, you feel more grateful for all the people that you have in your life, living, dead, best friends, ancestors, loved ones, whatever it is. And those are things that are really, for obvious reasons, very hard to tap into in the front country when there's cars zooming by and Instagram and screens and cameras and dogs barking, it's like you don't really have time to sit and reflect on all those things.
Can you share with us an encounter that you've had with an animal that really made a lasting impression, perhaps changed something in you?
Mm. Yeah, I was on a 28-day walkabout a couple years ago. We were maybe 20 days in, and there's this amazing canyon, and it had been completely washed by this insane flash flood the night before. We were sleeping kind of up on a bench. A bench is kind of like a geological feature, like a rock up above the canyon. So we were
Mhm.
sleeping up on a bench the night before, and we'd had some rain, but it wasn't anything crazy. And it was me and three other instructors, and we were walking. And this is very remote land. We'd been walking for 20 days at this point ish, give or take, and maybe more. I think it was actually towards the end of the trip, so maybe like 26 days. And so there's not a lot of other humans out there. And so when this flash flood came through, it erased all the trails and tracks kind of in this soft sand. And it was just like a fresh dinner plate. There was just nothing on the surface. There was trees and plants and such, but like on the sand, there was no tracks of any animals, no shoes, no nothing. And then, yeah, we were walking, and then I started seeing mountain lion tracks right in front of me. And I was like, weird, that must have been from this morning. I mean, we saw mountain lion tracks and mountain lion poop. It happens pretty often in the places that we roam because they're pretty reclusive animals, especially like wild ones. So I didn't think too much of it. And then they kept just kind of being on the same game trail that we were on. And then we came up right behind a big old mountain lion, and he kind of just quartered to us, and it paused, and it felt like we just stared at each other for an hour. We stopped moving, he stopped moving, and we were just locked eyes. He's maybe 50 yards in front of us. Um, I have no idea what that animal was thinking, but I can tell you I didn't feel 1% threatened, scared, intimidated, nothing. It was just like a mutual respect. It also didn't feel like he was scared of us. It was just like a very deep, intensive stare, eyes locked. You could move slowly from side to side and probably nothing would happen. He wasn't like jumpy or skittish. And yeah, we just locked eyes. And then he turned, like with his back away from us, and took a couple steps. He didn't like run. He wasn't worried that we were going to shoot him in the back or anything. He just started taking a couple steps. And then all of a sudden, there was a small, maybe like 10-foot cliff on our left, and he just levitated onto the cliff. Like, he just I didn't even see him like bound up for a jump. He just basically lifted himself like 10 feet in the air and instantly disappeared, and we never saw him again. Um, and he just vanished into the red rock. I'm sure he wasn't very far. Like, he probably was right next to us, but they're just so camouflaged. I'm like, does anyone see him? And they're like, nope. And so he disappeared after that. And I got the name Ryan the Lion shortly after that, which is like kind of my spirit animal nickname. And that's why the hat band that you see me wearing all the time on my cowboy hat is it's a band that I weaved using something called an inkle loom, and it's got the colors of the mountain lion, and I kind of always take it with me wherever I go, just kind of remembering that moment.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you. I so enjoyed the energy of the mountain lions when you took me to that very special, very sacred land that we spent time on, and feeling feeling an incredible company amidst their spirits and their energy. Felt very um, touched by them, and so
Yeah, they
I
were right next door. Them and the pictographs that you found, which I didn't even realize were there. That was pretty cool.
that was amazing. That was really, really, really something. I had some very profound personal ceremonial moments on those red rocks there. That reminds me, I wanted to ask you to speak a little bit to ceremony. Part of our time together. I would say the whole experience was a ceremony in itself, that you were very poetic in weaving certain moments of ritual and ceremony into our work. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the importance of ceremony, and the presence of it when navigating um, the wild, and also just as a way to kind of honor beginnings and endings, right? Which in itself is a whole spectrum of the cycle of change.
I think anytime you hold something in great reverence, that could be a form of a ceremony. So maybe it's a substance, a plant, a deity. It could be anything like that. And in my courses, it's really like the natural land. I always say that I have a very easy job because I don't have to do much of the teaching. I just take people out there and the land kind of does the teaching for me. And so, in a similar way, that's kind of the ceremony that we're participating in, which is honoring the land and really connecting with it on a deeper level. I think the difference between the experiences I'm facilitating and most people's interactions with nature, are like hiking on a trail. You hike somewhere and then you hike back, but really getting into it and sitting down and connecting with it, right? Identifying the plants and how we can have a relationship with them. Identifying the stories of the tracks and the trails and the scat and the animals around us. Identifying the noises they're making, who's mimicking who's calling for help, right? Who's bringing attention to a certain place, and really dropping into using all of our senses in those moments. Yeah, there are some other kind of little formulas I have to help people drop in a series of events, if you will. They're a little bit specific to me, so I don't kind of share them outside of the course. I think that's another piece of why it feels like a ceremony, is that I don't relinquish much control to the students. I ensure safety, and it's a well thought out, there's a lot of backup plans, and it's a very safe experience, but I don't give all the answers to people who come on my trips. A lot of it is, we'll see, we'll figure it out as we go, right? And that's a lot of the vibe. And so I'm always careful on podcasts and stuff when folks ask me questions to, for the student's sake, preserve some of that, because it is part of what makes it so special, is that there are so little expectations going into it. Folks don't know exactly what they're getting into. And I think that is part of the power that comes out of it. Like, how much did you know coming into the trip what we were doing?
Absolutely nothing. And and I would agree, Ryan. I think that was the best. That was just the best way to come into it, is without any expectation except for knowing I was in the right place at the right time. You are holding a particular space of expertise and being able to navigate the wild, the unknown. We've become very soft. We've become very soft, and we've become um, distant from our capacity to endure and to overcome and to meet tribulation with strength. And there's nothing like hiking or wading through icy cold water or meeting the cold that can provide that back to us. And it doesn't take that long. I went to meet you. I got into that truck that's now at the end of its rope when we first met, and there was no heat. And it is, later in November in Colorado, and I came to spend these days with you to meet the cold, and it was immediate that you gave me that experience, and I welcomed it. I was like, okay, here we are. It's time to meet the cold. And you so gracefully held my being in that process. And it was more than okay. It was invigorating. It was so gratifying. It was miraculous to overcome my fear of that, and to really to rise into the gifts of that, to wake up with icicles on my face, and and to smile and to feel so alive in that. I can't thank you enough, Ryan. Thank you for that.
It rings such a great point into my head, which is that these are for everyone. These trips, these experiences, whether it's with me or another practitioner or on your own, it doesn't matter. The the skills and the experiences are for everyone. Like Ciela Winter is not the prototypical like survivalist. Like you wouldn't look up survivalists and find your name in the dictionary, but you went out there and you did amazing and had an incredible time, no complaining, just living in very hard conditions with just a few tips and tricks and some lightweight gear. And it prepared you for all of these journeys that are ahead that are super epic. And I think that's part of the hurdle is that folks, they have this disconnection, like that nature and these experiences are other than, and that we're not part of nature, that our fingerprint isn't the same as the rings on a tree, that our hair is different than the fur on a deer, that our skin is different than the skin of a hog. It's like all of it is, we're all the same and it's all connected. They're all just little webs of one giant root ball.
It literally does feel like it's for everyone. When I came back, I was so inspired, and I wrote an article for Fast Company, and I'll link it to this podcast. And I was flooded with the desire to invite every single one of my loved ones and all the people I don't even know to have the same experience. And I've been an advocate for a lot of things in my life that I get inspired by, and I don't believe that everyone is cut out for everything. But there's something about returning to the wild that does feel like a birthright.
Mm.
And it feels like it has literally been usurped by the false reality and the false nature of this collective agreement that we have of what modernity looks like and what progress looks like and what the advancement of society looks like. Because in my heart, in my knowing, in my communion with the spirits of those plants and the sacredness of that land and the messages of those wild beasts in their communication, that all of that woven together in my experience there and my opportunity to be open enough, receptive enough to listen deeply, the knowing is that that is not the truth. That what we experience as advancement in this modern world is not necessarily advancing us towards our greatest, most aligned self and way of being. It is advancing us towards some end, but what end is that? I feel like we really need to ask ourselves, to what end are we advancing so quickly?
Yeah, I was just thinking about we have a choice, right? To think about the future as being kind of this negative, over techie world that, kind of consumes people and becomes, this black cloud. Or I feel like the more realistic, in my opinion, and the positive mindset to keep is that we're on the precipice of more freedom of time. I think AI is an incredible tool for a lot of things. Just like anything, it can be a tool used for good or bad. But ultimately, it's going to be able to handle a lot of the mundane bullshit that you have to deal with in the modern world. And so, if you're able to utilize those tools, there's a possibility that you are able to spread awareness more efficiently about nature to folks who have more time to enjoy nature. And so, if those variables ring true, then that equals more people with more time in nature. Now, again, the priority still has to be folks self-selecting into those groups, but I think that technology can help that and instead of hurt it as long as we allow it to. I had the pleasure of reaching people. I mean, most of my clients that I get are through electronic means, right? I have a podcast, I have an Instagram page. That may even have been how we connected first. I'm not sure. Or actually, I think ours was through Jess and FaceTime. But still, right?
Yeah.
Technology, right? If not, it would have been like email,
Hmm.
or before that, it would have been pen pals, you know? So it's just creating a funnel for us to spend time on what we think is important, and hopefully retreat space, the wilderness exploration space, the guiding space, hunting and fishing, and all these things become reconnection points that folks now have time for, now have money for, now have the desire to do. That's my hope.
Yeah, I love your optimism, and I agree. In the sense that I'm not against technology by any means, and it pains me to see how disconnected people have become from our true nature in so many ways. Um, and I get really excited. I get really jazzed about um, what it is that you're offering and what some of the opportunities that are arising to come back to something. And I also am very sensitive to the state of affairs. And I'm an astrologer and I study a lot around the language of the stars, which is a mirror, as above, so below. And there's a lot of indication of tremendous change in our world right now. And that change begins inside, right? There's an invitation for change inside each one of us right now. And to the measure of which we resist that change, there is um, adversity, right? Um, there is challenge. And as we embrace the change, as we acknowledge the change, there is more surrender to what is. It doesn't seem to be that we can really avoid the challenge or the adversity to get to the surrender because of our own resistance that we have built up over time. But we are in a very, very powerful moment to be able to traverse through to that, to the other side. Can you share with us a very challenging experience you've had out there?
One that comes to mind was I was living in a different truck, and I loved this truck. It was an old 19 Ford. I had this little camper on the back, and I lived in it for a long time. Traveled all over the world, all over North America in it. And it broke down in western Colorado on the western slope. And we went to this farm nearby that I was a friend of a friend, and worked the farm picking peaches for a couple days just to kind of have a place to stay and regroup and think while the truck was like in the shop. And then midday, we just got done picking peaches, which you kind of do in the morning. It's kind of back-breaking work. You're wearing this thing, and it's fun, but it's a lot of work. So afterwards, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to these canyons nearby and go for a trail run because that's just kind of what I needed to clear my head. Um, and it like felt pretty heavy, but my sister had came out to kind of help me out, and she was at the river just across from the trailhead, and she was just going to cool off in the water. It was like 111 degrees. So naturally, she was like, "You go trail run. I'll kick it by the river." It's like, okay, I'll be back in a little while. So I went for a run. I had never been on these trails before. And yeah, it was going well. And then I kind of did this long, big climb. Um, and my loadout was, I just had uh, like primitive sandals, pair of shorts, no water, no food, no shirt, just like a cowboy hat. And I'm setting this up for a reason. Basically, very minimal gear. And I kind of run onto the top of this mesa, and then I look down and I see a body in this like dried up riverbed. And so I end up running down there, and I run up to this. He's an older man, and just kind of got a feel for it and was asking him like, "Hey, how's your day going?" And he kind of looked up at me, and I knew right away that he was in trouble. Um, and he asked me if I had any water, and I was like, "No." Start asking him how long he's been out there, what happened. Basically, he had him and his friend had gotten lost. They didn't bring enough water. They got separated and couldn't find their way out of this canyon. And so I kind of picked him up and had like his arm around my neck, and we were gonna just try and walk it out. It was, a couple miles of the trailhead, maybe 4 miles or so. And yeah, he starts walking out with me, and immediately I realize he can only make it, maybe 50 yards at a time. He's completely dizzy. His lips are puckered in. He's not sweating anymore. He's just completely out of fluids. And so I hide him like under the sandbank in the shade. And I run out towards the trailhead because there's no service, and I call 911. As I get there, my sister automatically got an update because of our shared phone plan that like I called 911. Cops come to the trailhead. I'm like, great, now we can like all run in, like carry this guy out together. Cop gets there. He's like, no, I can't go in. It's too dangerous. I'm like, all right, do you have any water? So he just hands me one of those Ice Mountain 16-ounce things of water. I run in. I give it to the guy. He slams it right away, and he's able to walk, maybe 200 yards, and he's still out of it. So I run back out, and by that time, there's like two more cop cars there, and they give me another 16-ounce thing of water. I'm like, can my sister at least come in? They're like, no, the girl can't go in. No one's allowed to go. It's too dangerous. I'm like, all right. So I run back. I give them the 16 ounce of water, and we just keep doing this. I just keep going back and forth. Finally, the fire department shows up and all the ambulances, and they're like, yeah, we have to do like this big status check and gear swap before any of us can go in. So they give me a Gatorade. So I run the Gatorades in there. And then finally, after like, enough shuttles, we get to like, we're on top of the trailhead. Like the trailhead's just down below us. And we see the firefighters coming up. They had, changed into the proper outfits with the proper gear. And they meet us maybe a half mile away from the trailhead. And so, yeah, there's these funny videos of some dirty hippie coming down, and there's all these police cars and people clapping. And it was a fun day. His name was Frank. Frank still texts me maybe once a year, once every 6 months, and says, hey, man, how's it going? Thanks. Appreciate you. How's your family? And he was a nice guy. He was a experienced mountaineer and had done a bunch of different big hikes all over, and just got caught in a bad spot. And thank God he knew he was in trouble, and he stopped me and asked for help. Like some people, they may have a little bit too much ego in that spot and just, have you go on your way. But he would have died for sure. It was that kind of heat that, you can't last very long in it. So yeah, that was a challenging day. But it all comes back to the fact that if my car hadn't broken down, I wouldn't have been on that farm, and I wouldn't have been anywhere near that area. I mean, I would have been probably in the next state over. So without that, who knows what would have happened.
Thank you for sharing that. Um, it's a very well circled journey, as you just brought us back to that moment of your car breaking down, and now Frank is alive. And I'm wondering how that experience changed your life, Ryan.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it reminded me that humans are really good people. Um, like when I was carrying him out, he could have been pissy and mad at the other guy and left him and took his water and, all these things. And instead, we just had good conversations, and we stuck it out together, and invited me over for dinner, and we just became friends, and in the middle of like what could have been a really, really bad situation, we just kept it lighthearted. And yeah, he just seemed like a great guy. I think it definitely is one of those moments that restores your faith in humanity. I think it also destroyed my faith in emergency services. Um, it kind of bolstered my part of my initiative, which is to increase people's self-reliance in all facets of life. I think we are losing this emphasis on a physically robust body, And I think the yogis are the worst of it. I actually had this talk with John the other day, which is like a lot of the earth skills practitioners are of this like very yogi mindset, and it's very beautiful. But they're losing so much of like what the Shaolin monks of old knew, which is physical robustness is a necessary part of spiritual enlightenment. And without it, you're not able to continue pursuing these grand adventures. And so I think that I hadn't thought about this until now, but maybe that experience did play into me wanting to develop earth skills courses. And they're not all this way. Like some of them are very chill, but some of them are require like physical robustness and a willingness to push the body, not just the skills and the mind, but also the physical body.
Yeah, when you're saying you spoke with John, John being John Minnie,
Yes.
dear, dearest John, who I also encouraged and sent your way for a solo wilderness survival course. And I was so happy that you all got to spend some really quality time out there because I know from my own experience, um, being out there with you, Ryan, it's quality is the theme, you know, it's it's how nature provides us with the essence of quality in a way that our man-made world has slowly deteriorated from what that is. Can you share a little bit more about how nature can support us and what is it that we're actually looking for? Like what are the core principles of survival out there that can really support us in these times?
From a very practical level, if you have change going on in your life and you're looking for a container to sit down and think about it and actually hash out what do I really think? What are influences from other people? What is this from my parents telling me this? Is this from my news channel telling me this? How do I feel about a certain thing? There is no better place to do it than being in a minimally stimulated environment. That's why people meditate, right? So that they can get kind of a oneness and wipe out all of the noise. And on a walkabout, as we call it, like basically a multi-day trip through the woods with limited gear, there are no distractions. There's nowhere else for your mind to go. And so it's a very unique container to solve problems and think about what truly matters. I get a lot of students that are fresh off a divorce, fresh off a breakup with a loved one. Their kids just left and they're an empty nester. They're going through a job change. They just moved across the country. They just lost their parents, right? At any point in time, all of us have things like that that go on. Maybe you've had two or three of those things go on at once, or even something much more traumatic, abuse, sudden passing of loved ones, disease, things like that. And so I find a lot of people getting a lot of solace in the wilderness for those sorts of events. On a separate occasion, I think you were kind of asking more about the survival piece. Going without allows you to go within. And so when you go through these situations, like, maybe a cold sleep with minimal gear, or maybe you didn't have as much food as you're used to, you start to have these very raw, honest conversations with yourself, and you go to a much deeper place within yourself. Indigenous tribes have known this for thousands and thousands of years. That's why these sorts of experiences sound very similar or are very similar to rites of passage performed by tribes all over the world still today, and ones that you can read about throughout history. Many of them are about knowing more and carrying less, developing your skills and your resilience and your mental capacity and your ability to use nature as a tool and a friend, and not about carrying a boatload of food or carrying a boatload of fancy equipment. And that's really one of the main places that I teach from is that like no more, carry less principle. There are some schools out there that you can find that are very like technology and gear focused, and I'm sure there's a lot of practical application to those. It's just not the place that I teach from.
Ryan, how can people find you?
Yeah, good question. My Instagram is ryan.quinn.maguire. That's a good way to find me. In terms of like core stuff, just direct message me on there and we can chat. Usually from there, if people are real people, I'll just have them text me on my cell phone. But probably not best to give out my cell phone on the interwebs. Uh, for courses, learning all the different skills it takes to live as a tribe, walking through an incredible remote river valley that's very rarely ever touched by humans. It's one of the most beautiful, magical places. Also, you can always reach out and do private courses similar to Ciela. Those are open roughly year round, depending on scheduling. And those can be groups anywhere from one person to 12 people. Those are really good for families and friend groups. I have a podcast. It's called Who the Wild Things Are. Wild is spelled WYLD. And I do a pretty good job posting there. I think summer it's harder for me because I'm guiding and when I'm not guiding, I'm doing personal mountain things. And so I'm not as good at sitting inside during the summer. But as the weather changes, I am pretty consistent with the podcast. So
Yeah, I'll link our podcast. We did an awesome one in your truck on the way back from our journey. And so I'll share that again. And yeah, if anyone out there is listening and thinking you'd like to do something like that, but aren't sure you could really do it alone, you feel free to reach out to me. And, it'd be awesome to get a group together and I'll go back out there with you, Ryan. I'd be so honored. Ryan, is there any last words of wisdom you'd like to leave with us today?
man, one thing that I want to remind folks, as earlier we were saying, like these practices are for everyone, right? This kind of rewilding, this deep remembrance is for everyone. It doesn't have to be the craziest thing in the world. I like caves, for example. I've lived in a lot of caves. You don't need to have to go and find a cave and sleep in a cave. You could do whatever it is you want to do that makes you feel like 1% more wild, right? You don't have to do any of the stuff that somebody else does. Just because Ciela likes to do cold water immersion, if that's not your thing, then don't do what Ciela does. Just do whatever makes you feel alive and like an animal. Like maybe it's just a little bit of morning sunshine with your feet on the ground. Maybe it's getting on the ground with your kids and bear crawling and roaring like a lion. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is that makes you feel like slightly more of a human being, do that, start there and do it as often as you can. And then you can try and, you know, seek places where you can take it to the next level and really dive in. But it can start with a tiny little step, little baby step.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you for that and for all that you do. Thank you for the invitation for us to go out there and be with you in a very trusted, safe way. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you. And thanks for having me on. And yeah, anybody listening, reach out. I'm an open book and always happy to chat about this or whatever you want to chat about. So thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun, Ciela, and thanks for um, teaching me how to use technology because that was not super impressive on my part.
We did it. We did it, Ryan. Awesome. Okay. We didn't even talk really about the details of what goes on out there. And I think that's just perfect given what you were sharing. It's like, I didn't really know what we were going to do. I knew I was hoping that I would learn how to make a fire, but,
Yeah.
I had no idea it was going to be so medicinal.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
you'll always learn some form of the skills on every course, right? Shelter, fire, food, water. Um, you can always count on leveling up in those core spaces. But the specific ways in which that happens, who knows?
Okay, Ryan. Thank you so much. Let's talk again really soon.
Yeah, I'd like that.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks for being here today.
All right, y'all. Stay
Okay,
wild.
see you later.